Welcome to our presentation. This is the Riverride financial analysis team, and together we completed the full cost volume analysis for Riverride manufacturing. Each member of our group contributed a different role to make sure the financial results were accurate, clear, and fully supported. My role was to lead the contribution margin and weighted average CM calculations. I focused on analyzing the cost structure for both kayaks, determining how the sales mix impacts profitability, and preparing the Excel models that support our results. We also had team members responsible for the break-even analysis. They used the weighted contribution margin to calculate Riverride's break-even point in units and determine how many rotomolded and composite kayaks are needed before the company begins generating profit. Another team member worked on the target profit scenario. This includes the case where rotomolded kayaks shift to 70% of total units sold. They analyzed how this change affects the total units required to earn $2 million in net income and how the distribution shifts between the two products. We also had someone assigned to develop the CVP income statements. They created separate statements for rotomolded and composite kayaks based on the fixed cost allocations and sales revenue assumptions. This part helps Riverride understand the profitability of each product line on its own. Finally, we had a team member focus on visuals and interpretation. They created the break-even analysis charts, formatted the tables, and helped interpret what the charts and ratios meant for Riverride's financial strategy. This included explaining how shifts in sales mix influence the company's risks and operating leverage. Together, all of these roles allow us to present a complete and accurate financial analysis for Riverride manufacturing. Understanding Riverride's business problem. This slide explains the main issue of Riverride is trying to solve. The company sells two kayaks, rotomolded and composite, and each one has different prices, cost, and contribution margins. Because these products perform differently, Riverride's overall profit depends heavily on the sales mix, which is currently 80% rotomolded and 20% composite. Riverride wants to understand how this mix affects their break-even point, their weighted average contribution margin, and how many units they need to sell to reach their profit goals. To answer these questions, we use a cost volume profit analysis, which helps connect sales, costs, and profit. Overall, the company's challenge is figuring out how both products work together financially so that they can make a more informed production and pricing decisions going forward. Because Riverride sells both kayaks in fixed proportions of 80% rotomolded and 20% composite, we need to calculate the weighted average contribution margin. This gives us a single value that represents the average amount of Riverride earns above variable costs for each kayak sold. The math is shown on the slide. For rotomolded kayaks, we take $380 multiplied by 0.80, which equals $304. For composite kayaks, we take $660 multiplied by 0.20, which equals $132. When we add these together, we get a weighted average contribution margin of $436 per unit. I also included an Excel screenshot that displays the formulas used so that the calculation is transparent. This $436 figure is extremely important because Riverride will use it to compute both the break-even units and the units required to reach its target profit. Without an accurate weighted average CM, the rest of the CVP analysis would not be reliable. This slide highlights why the weighted average contribution margin is essential for Riverride's decision making. Since rotomolded kayaks dominate the sales mix at 80%, it is easy to assume they bring in the most profit. The weighted CM confirms how much each combined unit actually contributes toward fixed cost and earning. A weighted contribution margin of $436 means every kayak Riverride sells contributes an average of $436 to covering fixed costs and generating profit afterward. This helps Riverride evaluate whether the current 80-20 sales mix is ideal and whether increasing composite sales could raise profitability. This single number ties the company's financial information together. It supports clearer forecasting, better pricing decisions, and more accurate planning for production and sales targets moving forward.
affects their ability to reach a 2 million target profit. And then I'll walk through the CVP income statement for both product lines. To start with requirement 3, the company changes its sales mix to 70% roto-modeled and 30% composite kayaks. This shift is important because each product contributes differently to profit. When we apply this new mix, the weighted average contribution margin increases to $464 per unit, which gives Riverride a stronger overall margin. Using this updated WACM, we calculated how many units the company needs to sell in order to earn a $2 million net income. Riverride would need to sell a total of 6,078 kayaks. When we break that down by the new sale mix, that equals 4,255 roto-modeled units and 1,823 composite units. This mix shows that the majority of the volume still comes from roto-modeled kayaks. But composite units remain important because of the higher margin they bring in. On the next slide, we show this breakdown visually. You can see how the 70-30 mix influences the unit distribution, even though fewer composite kayaks are required. They still make a meaningful contribution towards achieving the profit goal. The contribution of both adding up to 6,078 units is exactly what Riverride needs to hit the 2 million target. Moving on, we prepared a CVP income statements for each product line using a total sales level of 3 million based on the two-thirds and one-third split. Roto-modeled kayak generates 2 million in revenue, while composite kayaks generate 1 million after subtracting variable cost. The contribution margin for roto-modeled kayak is $800,000 for composite kayaks. It's $330,000. Once we factor in fixed costs, roto-modeled roto-modeled kayaks produce $140,000 in operating income, while composite kayaks produce $170,000. Even though composite kayaks generate less sales, they actually end up being more profitable because they require for fewer fixed costs. Finally, when we look at both products together, total company operating income comes out to 310,000 at the sales level. This comparison shows how sales mix plays a major role in profitability. Small changes in the mix can shift how much each product contributes and ultimately affects Riverside's total profit.
So, for my part of the presentation, I'm going to be going over the risk analysis for Riverride using the degree of operating leverage, also known as DOL. I used Excel to calculate the DOL for both product lines, and I'm going to explain what those numbers mean, how sensitive each product's profit is to sales changes, and what the shift in the sales mix means for the company overall. And then I'm going to be ending with some recommendations based on the data that I will show. So looking at this first slide, these are the numbers I calculated using Excel for both kayaks. The DOL basically shows how sensitive profit is to changes in sales volume. So when I ran the numbers, the rotomolded kayaks ended up with a DOL of about 5.71, which is pretty high. And then the composite kayaks have a DOL of 1.94, which is much lower. So if you look at the rest of the table, you can see how the contribution margins and operating income feed into those DOL values. And seeing this data laid out like this makes it really clear that the rotomolded line is a lot more sensitive to changes in sales compared to the composite line. So now I want to explain what those DOL numbers actually mean for Riverride. So starting with the rotomolded kayaks, since the DOL is 5.71, that tells us that profits change a lot when sales change. For example, if sales were to go up or down by just 10%, profit would move by around 57%. So this product line goes up fast when demand is strong, but it can also drop fast if sales slow down. And then on the composite side, the DOL is only about 1.94, so it reacts much less to changes in volume. A 10% change, just like the other example in sales, leads to about a 19% change in profit, which is a lot less. So compared to rotomolded, composite kayaks are more steady and predictable, and they don't swing as much when sales move. Seeing both sides together, you can tell that the two products carry very different levels of operating risk. And now looking at how this ties into the sales mix, when Riverride sells a higher percentage of rotomolded kayaks, the company's overall operating leverage increases. And higher leverage means profits move more when sales move, so the business becomes riskier. Composite kayaks help balance it out because their DOL is lower and the profit is more stable. So, based on this, my recommendation is that Riverride keeps a balance between the two products. Rotomolded kayaks are great for growth when demand is strong because they boost profit quickly, but relying on them too much increases risk. Composite kayaks help stabilize profit during weaker or more uncertain periods, so maintaining them in the mix gives the company more stability. So overall, keeping a balanced mix between the two and watching demand trends will help Riverride avoid big profit swings and manage risk better.